Q&A. So the floor is open.
I have one, but I have to...
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So this is actually on what we're learning right now with you by Noach. Hashem says, and we will let us do this thing. He's like, from what I've heard, it's him kind of like talking to the malachim, and like, even though he's not actually asking them for advice, he's going to do it, right? That's from what I understand. But it seems, is this the last place where he does that, where he asks them for advice, where he talks to them?
Let me think. You have it in the creation of man, and you have it in the, 1 second. I think, I'm trying to remember the language with stone. Maybe in stone it's the same thing also. I don't remember for sure. I think it's Erdonov. Yeah. No, there it's singular. So any other place? Well, let's understand what the idea is. The idea is that the great should take counsel with those who are inferior to them. Now, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Abraham, I'm going to destroy stone, when he says to Moshe, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people, and he gets a response, and the response is not in agreement with him, it's the same gesture. It's not just, now it's not to the Malachim, to the angels, it's to human beings. But it's the same quality of action. I have this resolution, so to speak, to do this, and I'm going to present it to those below me and get a response from them. So it's the same type of interaction, just that the subject is different. The participants are different. So I think that is a continuation of the same thing.
Is it because, though, that Noach didn't fight for the Jews, that Hashem did this then?
So there, that's what we said, that's what the Zohar says, that he was inviting him also to respond. And then the Midrash has this many times. Shall we make man, the various divine attributes, so to speak, each one had its opinion, yes and no. And this is something which is a very common feature of the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with the world. It's not a game of solitaire. It really is a participatory relationship. We're called upon to bring the world to its perfection that God wants it to come to. We're not just observers. We're participants in the process. So I think this is a much broader theme that encompasses all these aspects. I didn't put them all together till you asked your question now, but I think they all are parts of this larger picture. Yeah, Q&A, gang. Yeah.
I think I remember seeing somewhere that there's a Gematria for the Asher Yatzar Bracha for the Nekavim, Chalulim.
I don't know it. But just a remark about Gematria, the Maharal and others point out that you can't learn anything really new. You can use it to confirm things and perhaps see things applied in ways that you didn't see them before, but you can't really confirm things. And to my knowledge, there's never a halachic question which is settled with a Gematria. Oh, but the numerical value, this is this, therefore do it at 7 o'clock, not at 8 o'clock. You don't have that. And the one which I think, which is really, really indicative, it says that the Egyptians made the Jewish people work hard, rigorous labor. And the word in Hebrew is farach, pei, resh, chaf. Now, there is a source that says the following. If you take pei, resh, chaf, and first exchange the letters in what's called the atbash coding. Atbash means aleph is associated with tuf, beis with shin, the first and the last, the second and the next to last. Associate the letters that way, and then switch each one for its associated letter. So pei is 6 from the end, so it's a vav, and resh is 3 from the end, so it's a gimel, and chaf is 12 from the end, so that's over the middle. So the associated letter is lamed. So now you have a vav, a gimel, and a lamed. Now take the numerical values of those. Vav is 6, and the gimel is 3, and the lamed is 30, which is 39. And this teaches you that the 39 categories of activity which were used to build the tabernacle and which are forbidden on Shabbos, the Egyptians caused the Jews to work all those 39 categories of activity. That's what you get from the Atbash and the Gematria. So first of all, for those of you who have some familiarity with various facets of Jewish sources, what kind of book, what kind of author would you expect to see something like that in? This will test your prejudices. In the Zohar. Okay, one possibility.
I remember you told the story, so
Okay, that's right. You don't have to. Yeah. And people would guess that it would be a Hasidic book because they're into that kind of thing and so forth and so on. Happens to be Tosfos. There's Tosfos on Arvei Psachim, which is as sober and as central and mainstream as you could possibly get. Now, what does this reveal to me? Well, we knew that the Jews worked terribly in Egypt. So this only quantifies it. Yes, the amount of work that they did covered all 39 categories, which isn't so surprising because those 39 categories are the typical kinds of physical work. And then it makes a link, and it says, you see these 39 categories? They can be used by an oppressor to enslave you, and they can be used from the point of view of your own spirituality to build a tabernacle, and Shabbos is higher than both. Shabbos is something that's above both, and you don't do them on Shabbos. So that's connection of the ideas together, but no new ideas come into existence here. And that's why you shouldn't make up your own gematrios, and I know there are things, applications on the phone, and there are things on the internet where you can look up words or sentences and get an instant gematria from it. You know, don't bother. Don't bother. Learn the ones that are made by people who know the whole tradition and understand it, and don't, because that's play, and it can't give you anything that's deep and true, and it might mislead you. After all, there are 50 gates of wisdom. Wow. And the word tame, tes, mem, aleph, which means defiled, is also 50. So I can hear the novice, aha! So the 50 gates of wisdom must all be defiled. It must be all disgraced because, after all, it's 50-50. But no, that's not right. So, you don't want to fall into those kinds of things. Yeah, let's see. Anybody else before I go back? Yeah, okay.
So, from what I was told recently was that the reason that there's Pekuach Nefesh by Shabbos is that for other shabbason, right? To lengthen so that you'll have more shabbason to keep, right? So you're able to break Shabbos in these ways because of the shabbason in the future. But what if the person is supposed to, pass away by the next week or something like that?
Good question. In fact, the Gemara rejects that reason. That's not the reason. Well, let's put it this way. It's not the only reason. And it doesn't, you're exactly right. It doesn't apply to say that you can violate this Shabbos so as to be able to perform more Shabbos in the future. It assumes that you have a future, And if your death is coming in 5 days, and you might know that, you might be in a condition which can't last more than 5 days, then according to that reason, you wouldn't violate Shabbos to save your life. That's not true. You do violate Shabbos to save your life. So those reasons are after the fact effects which are relevant to this question, but they're not the reason why it is done. It's explicit verses that tell you to do that. These are the mitzvahs that a person should do and live through them. Okay, Rashi and Taisus in Bava Metzia. Okay, we know about it. But and then there are three where are exceptions to that, where even if the performance of the mitzvah requires you to die, you have to die. There was a very famous person, I guess 100 years ago, wrote a book which was very famous, and in it he said, the Torah was made for man, not man for the Torah. And the proof of it is that if it's a question of violating a mitzvah or dying, you violate the mitzvah and stay alive. If someone puts a gun to a Jew's head and says, eat the cheeseburger, he eats the cheeseburger. If he says to him, violate Shabbos, he violates Shabbos. That's the general rule. So therefore, this author said, the Torah was made for man, not man for the Torah. Okay, it's a footnote. Now, unfortunately, the footnotes are printed at the back of the book, but I hold that that's why you have lots of fingers, one for the page and one for the footnotes. So he says, flip back, and you look in the back, and it says, well, but there are 3 mitzvos which, rather than transgress, you have to die. Oh, so sometimes you do have to die. Well then, was the Torah made for man or man made for the Torah? What happened to the point in the text once you take part of the footnote? No explanation. He just puts it in the footnote. I was underwhelmed by that as the logic of the author, and I resolved that I was not going to be overly affected by that author. So it's much more subtle than that. Things aren't off and on like that, or just either or like that.
It was just mostly made for us.
Sorry?
It was just mostly made for us.
Well, I don't know what mostly would count as here. I don't know whether the counting up of the it's sort of like saying this book is a more important book than that book because it weighs more. I'm not sure that counting up the number of mitzvos explains the weight of the motivation for the 2 different categories. So I think it's more subtle than that. Yes?
Is it considered pikuach nefesh for Shabbos even if it's a goy? Can I break Shabbos to save a goy's life?
No, you cannot. Generally, you cannot. And this is a very, very interesting halacha. Sometimes when a person asks a question, especially a critical question, there are 2 different ways to respond to it. Sometimes when the person asks the questions, he hasn't worked it out carefully, and you can show him his logic isn't good, or he doesn't understand his facts correctly. You can speak to him in his terms, given his assumptions, and show him that his question is a mistake. Sometimes you can do that. But sometimes you can't do that. He's starting from his assumptions, and his conclusion does follow from his assumptions. What he doesn't realize is that we start from different assumptions, and from our assumptions, our conclusion follows. So that already neutralizes the critique, and then you can ask him, do you have any reason to think that you could show your assumptions are better than my assumptions? And if you don't, that definitely puts you in a position of parity. It's not a position where you can say, you're wrong because. And that's a big step forward for such a person. I heard this from Yaakov Rosenberg, who was one of the founders of Ohr Somayach many, many years ago, and I think it's worth knowing. I want to compare 2 scenarios. Here's scenario number 1. Someone is drowning in a lake in total isolation. There's no one to help him, and he drowns, and he dies. Now, do we have any complaints against the Creator that the person died? Do we think that every time a person dies, the Creator is guilty of murder or guilty of not saving a human life? I think we allow the Creator the authority to determine when people should be born and when people should die. So We who understand there's a creator and there's divine providence say he died because the creator decided that his life should end at that time. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two, he's in the lake, he's drowning, I'm standing there, and God says, don't save him. Well, isn't that the same thing? I mean, now God has decided that this should be the end of his life. He decided that by engineering that he should be in the lake drowning and telling me not to save him. If we had no complaints against God, against the Torah, against the ethics, against the so in the first case, why should we have any complaints in the second case? So the difference between us and the critic is, the critic says, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in divine providence, it's a human life and you won't save it, so you're a criminal. He's right. If there's no creator and there's no divine providence, and someone is dying and I could save his life and I don't, I'm a criminal. That's quite right, if I give him his assumptions. But if I use my assumptions, it's quite clear that I'm not a criminal and there's no complaint against God. He's running the universe. He's the one who gives life. He's the one who can determine when life should end. So at this point, I say to the critic, you made your assumptions. Let's suppose I made my assumptions. I don't believe mine are assumptions. I think I have good reason for it. Let's say I made an assumption. Your conclusion follows from your assumptions. My conclusion follows from my assumptions. That puts us on a par. Now, unless you have good reason to think your assumptions are true and mine are false, and I would be very interested to hear them if you think you did. I think it'd be a real uphill battle, because I've worked on this for a long time. If you don't have that, then you have to just realize that you've organized your world in a certain way, and this is the conclusion. And I've organized my world in a different way, and I have a different conclusion, and we're on a par, and then we just have to decide to agree to disagree. And that's not where he was coming from when he raised the critique. Yeah.
In that scenario, why would Hashem test you and give you the burden of the guilt of you could have saved them for the rest of your life?
Well, first of all, if I do what the Creator tells me, I'm not going to feel guilty. What better reason could I possibly have for doing it? Am I not behaving responsibly, correctly, and morally in doing what the Creator of the universe tells me to do? Why should I feel guilty?
Because you could have saved a life.
Yeah, but if saving the life wasn't the right thing to do, then I won't feel guilty for not doing it.
But then why would he put you in a situation where you could have saved a life and he tells you no, and you have to trust in that or feel guilty?
Oh, but I'm not going to feel guilty if the Creator of the universe tells me to do it. That would be, I mean, I could, it's possible, but it would be a breakdown where my feelings are not reflecting the truth. I mean, that's like people who are afraid when there's no real danger. People don't fly in airplanes, right? They're really afraid, all right, but we pity them because actually planes are much safer than going any other way. So here, if a person felt guilty when he did what the Creator told him to do, there is a breakdown between philosophy of life and his feelings, and we suggest maybe he should get therapy, and so his feelings will be more realistic. If there's sympathy there and that sort of thing, that's another matter. That's right. And then life teaches you, experience teaches you that if you just follow your feelings, a lot of things are going to go wrong. And even if that sagest of all sources, Diet Coca-Cola, once advertised, if it feels good, do it, that's a disaster. If it feels good, do it. Step on the other guy's toe, burn his flag, punch him because he's wearing a Jewish star. If it feels good, do it. Really. And if you wave a Palestinian flag and I feel good by punching you in the nose, I should do it. I should do it because it makes me feel good. Really? That's the way you think a human being should live? If it feels good, do it. Somehow, I think that's real evolution. You're reducing the status of a human being to a slightly smarter squirrel, which is the conclusion they take from Darwin. I refuse. I think that's utter degradation. Yeah.
Same train of thought. That how do you consider someone to be a goy, in the sense that like maybe their great grandmother was Jewish and they haven't practiced for 3 or 4 generations, but if you go up the line, they're of Jewish descent. Is there some way where that breaks down? Obviously, if you don't know, you don't know. But
Well, we have a rule. Now the rule is sophisticated, and there are exceptions. But the general rule is when you have a set of factors that create two groups, you look at which group is the majority. You go after the majority. Now, if it's going to be 4 generations, it's got to be mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-great-grandmother, right? So in other words, it's got to be the female line all the way up.
Yeah.
Okay, but then the number of people in the general population who have that kind of line is very small. Right? So you're certainly dealing with a tiny minority of the people in the generation. So you are allowed to make a judgment on the basis of the idea of the majority that the person is not Jewish.
But so they're if they're less than 50%, like
There are cases
Yeah.
where the Gemara, the Mishnah talk about it, where you have a mixed town,
yeah.
and then they say if the majority of the residents of the town are Jewish, and something happens to an unidentified resident,
Yeah.
then you have to take into account the probability that he's Jewish. Of course, you would have to do that. But in the general population, it's very small. Yeah.
So, would that apply also to rabbinical laws of Shabbos, or is it just your rights?
So let me go back. Right. Let me think now how this works. The Chasam Sofer was famous for saying that if failing to save the life of a non-Jew would become public and it would excite negative feeling against Jews and put Jews in danger, then you should save him, even violating a biblical commandment. I don't know that there would be any difference between a rabbinic commandment and a biblical commandment here. I don't know. I don't see where the difference would be. The rabbis would have to tell you, but in these kinds of cases, you should do it. And I'm not aware that there is such a thing. So I don't think that makes a difference. But there is a difference, and I must tell you, in this country, this was before I came in Aliyah, maybe 60 years ago, there was a case where there was a Jewish doctor in a hospital, and an Arab was brought in, and he refused to treat him, and he died, and it became there were demonstrations, and it was in all the press, and for weeks and weeks this went on, and everybody was yelling, screaming about it, until it became discovered that the case was made up. It never happened. They just made it up to provoke the yelling and screaming. Okay. So it's something which I'm not aware of that has happened. But that is the halacha, and that's one way to see where the halacha is coming from. Yeah.
Do you save a Reformed Jew from drowning if it violates Shabbos?
You see, that's another example of what he was saying before, because it was a question of saving him in order that he should be able to keep more Shabbos. What if he's not going to keep Shabbos? Right? That would be another case. I'm not aware. You see, I'm not expert in these kinds of halakhic questions. Let me think for a second. I guess today's Reformed Jew for sure you would save, because I grew up Reformed, so I know what that is. Today's Reformed Jew is totally innocent. He's also totally incompetent. That's why he's totally innocent. He doesn't reject God. He can't spell God. So he's a victim of lack of education, and he certainly is Jewish. If he's born Jewish, he's Jewish. So I imagine that you would save him. If a person rebelled, and then there are certain categories of rebellion where you wouldn't save him. But Reformed Jews aren't like that. It's like asking you, could you make a mistake in Chinese? You have to know some Chinese to make a mistake in Chinese, right? Just babbling isn't a mistake in Chinese, right? These people don't know enough to make a mistake about Judaism. Yeah.
And what if the guy is going through conversion?
Going through conversion, but hasn't finished.
He's about to finish conversion. Like, he will be keeping Shabbos afterwards.
He's still not Jewish. He's still not Jewish. Yeah.
How does our tefilos for others help them?
That's a good question. First of all, let's understand that praying for others goes back a long way. Isaac prayed for his wife Rebekah to have a child. When Miriam was punished with having signs of leprosy, Moses prayed for her health. This is all in the verses. So the idea of praying for other people is definitely a central part of the. Now, let me give you an example of the principle, and then I'll show you how it applies here. There are 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. There's a large literature about why there are 2 days and what it means. Rav Dester gives one explanation, that on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, each person is judged on the basis of his own record. What has he done right? What has he done wrong? And what are the right conclusions for his life in the coming year? And the second day, what's judged is how other people depend upon him. So you say, let's suppose he's a man who has a family. You say, well, okay, he did this wrong, he did that wrong, and this was inadequate. Not a very good record, and he really deserves certain things to happen to him. But do his children deserve that this should happen to their father? Maybe not. And then he'll get a more favorable judgment because there are others who depend upon him. So now, what happens when I pray for Ruvain? What I'm saying to Kadosh Baruch Hu is, I'm hoping that he'll be cured. Let's say he's sick. I'm hoping he'll be cured. I'm asking you, please, to cure him. So now, if he doesn't cure him, one of the associated effects will be that I'll be disappointed. Do I deserve to be disappointed? How much merit do I have? And the merit that I have, which creates a reason for me not to be disappointed, is now added to the merits of his case, which now gives him more merits in favor of his being cured. So I'm putting myself into the calculation for his case by praying for him. That's one mechanism by which it's going to have an effect. It may not have the total effect, but it's definitely going to have an effect. It'll change the calculation. Yeah.
Kern was telling me a story where he was wound up at a Shabbat table from a family he didn't know, and he was talking about how he was just praying for the food to be something he would eat, so he would not disappoint the guests. Sorry, not disappoint the host. And and they.
I can remember that absolutely.
And so it turned out like that one meal they happened to just usually they had fish with the skin on it, but he didn't like fish with the skin on it. Just by chance, hours earlier, even though they had no idea he was coming, they this week we'll try fish without the skin. And,
wow.
And so how does that prayer in the present, does that affect the past? Like what did the, because it, yeah.
No, but first of all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu can take into account in the past that he's going to make that prayer in the future. There's no problem with that. But it could work out this way. How did he end up at that family? Rather than another family. He ended up at a family where they in fact had the fact that they did that. I would take that as a way of Kodesh Baruch Hu sort of revealing the fact that he's running the world. We know he's running the world, but he often hides it behind what people call the natural phenomena. But here, the fact that they did it on this particular Shabbos, my Rebbitzin had, when she was first married, and they had kids over for meals, to stay over for Shabbos, and there was one or two boys who had gone off the derech, but they were hospitable, and they had them. Only twice in her whole life did the wind blow out the fire under the children. And it was the 2 times that she had those boys over. Didn't happen before, it didn't happen since. So she said, okay, what's the probability of doing that when you have a 50-year record of making Shabbos? Just those 2 times. So sometimes Kodesh Baruch Hu says, here's the little flag. Hello, I'm running things. And you should be grateful for that. Grateful for the fact that he showed it to you. Yeah.
What's the reason that we pray or we should pray? Because I doubt it's to change the outcome. Because if you look at it, I don't think it really does change the outcome most of the time.
How would you know that?
I'm saying, for people that pray for a certain outcome and the people that don't pray for a certain outcome, I don't think you'll find a significant difference. Let's say for a sick child.
Well, let me tell you about an experiment that was done about 15 years ago, checking the efficacy of prayer. It was done in a Korean hospital, a Korean fertility hospital. One of the leaders of the investigation was a professor of medicine at Columbia University, and they assigned these people random numbers, and they had people praying for them, some yes and some no, and there was a statistical difference between the two of them, and it was published as a paper. Oh, a big tarara, it couldn't be, and how could it be, and blah, 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 the whole thing, right? And then they tried to reproduce the result, and the reproduction of the result failed. So, from using the result as evidence that prayer helps, it went to, since we couldn't reproduce the result, that's evidence that prayer doesn't help. But, as a couple of philosophers pointed out, that's a mistake. Because you're now using evidence to track the behavior of an intelligent agent. And maybe the intelligent agent doesn't want to leave evidence that he's doing it. So when you're checking, you won't see it. But when you're not checking, that's what's happening. You're reporting what in medicine they call anecdotal evidence. Gee, I know at least 16 people. And of those 16, yeah, okay, you do, but you haven't done a survey of hundreds of thousands, and you haven't done different types of prayer and over different periods of time, the way a scientific study would be done. So I think that it's not obvious that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to show that this is what's happening when you're looking to see that it's happening. That doesn't mean it's not happening the rest of the time. That's one thing. And then if you're asking about the philosophy of it, the philosophy, let's say a simple case where a person is praying for himself, so praying for something should happen to himself, our understanding is that the act of prayer changes who you are. And the decisions that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes for a person depends upon who that person is and what he does. And if a person moves himself from one category to another category, then there will be different outcomes because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has principles for different categories of people. And we know that's true because we have a principle called reward and punishment. And reward says, if you do these things, you'll get a reward. And punishment says, if you don't do those things, you get a punishment. So what I do determines my relationship to the principles and determines the outcome. So my actions definitely have an effect on the outcome that I will experience. And one of them is prayer. So it definitely has background of principles that can't be denied. And my question is, well, you'll see it if you're looking. Yeah.
So I think it was in Brachos where Rabbi was walking back to his town and there was a fire in the village. And I believe he said, it's not my home, it's not my home. And like, I think somebody questioned it because he said that you're not allowed to, and it was no taiva on him because he was just saying it's not mine because he has full belief that it wasn't his. But they were saying that you can't pray that it won't be your home that's on fire.
That's right.
So how far does that go in terms of like if there's a child that's really sick, it's very likely the child is going to die. Can you pray for that child?
Oh, no. There it's a question of praying for the past. The house is already burning. So to pray now that it shouldn't be your house means my prayer now should affect what happened 3 hours ago when the fire started. That you can't do. You can't pray for the past. The past is already in the books. Something that's likely or unlikely, no matter how, the Gemara says, even when the sword is on your neck and a nick in your skin has appeared and your blood is dripping down the blade of the sword, don't give up hope. And don't give up hope would mean that you could also pray. There are times we pray for people to die. There are always exceptions. But the idea that until it's done, as that great Jewish sage Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. So we would not say because it's very likely and because it's predicted and so forth and so on. I have a grandson who underwent a certain process, and the doctors all said it's a medical miracle. According to what we know, it couldn't have happened. Couldn't have happened. Yeah, absolutely no explanation. So, it's like the Chazon Ish who talks about this, there's a very beautiful way to look at it. I have a picture of the future, okay? And I have different slots for different things that are going to happen. Make sure that one slot has in it a question mark, because it's called being prepared for the anticipating the unanticipated. What's his name called? Unknown unknowns, right? There are unknowns, but there are things I know that where I have ignorance. But they're unknown. I don't even know that I'm ignorant. I don't know there's something to be ignorant about. And the world is like that. And science is like that all the time. And that being the case, so since there's always that possibility that you don't know about, to say no, this door is shut, this door can't be opened, is something which we don't do.
So could he have prayed though that like his family got out in time, because that would be past?
He can pray that they will get out in time,
They will.
but not. He can't pray for the past. That's what that Mishnah in Brachos is talking about. That's what the commentators say. You can't pray that the past should be one way or another. Yeah.
How does that work with what the rabbi just said a few minutes ago, where God could like anticipate your prayer for the future? Like He knows you're going to pray for it, so that prayer kind of that.
With a food case.
And is it actually better not to pray? Like because something
No.
already happened, it's better not to pray for it?
No. His prayer, this fellow's prayer was, where I go, the food that I get should be food that I can eat.
No, he was already there, like at the table when he made the prayer.
Okay, so what? Food hasn't been served yet, right? He's praying that when the food is served, the food that I get will be food that I can eat. He's not praying about the past. He's praying about the future, right? God can, in the past, arrange that should meet his prayer, that he could do. But he's not praying for what happened in the past. He's praying for what happens in the future. It could happen that in the kitchen, something goes bad, and they have to substitute something else, and there's something else, something that he likes. They have to take out tuna from a can because the meat went bad. And there are ways that these things can happen in terms of the future. He wasn't praying that the past should be X, Y, Z. In this case, it was prepared in the past that it should work out the way he wanted to work it out. But that's not what he prayed for.
So if I have a scratch card in my hand, I haven't scratched it yet. Is it because it cannot naturally change? I should not be praying for it to be the right one, to be the one that won.
That's another category. That would be a category of praying for a miracle. Because you know that in natural terms, it's already fixed. Of course, a Kodesh Baruch Hu could make the number a different number, that he could do, but that's praying for a miracle. And typically we don't pray for miracles either. Right? If it's for a lottery, right? So let's say I really have the wrong number, and the right number is someplace else, but that one could get lost. That one could get wet and get smudged, right? And then another number could be here, and it could all be changed in a moment. I could end up with the right number on my piece of paper through a miracle, but that would be a miracle. So you're not supposed to pray for miracles. Typically, you're not supposed to pray for miracles. Yeah.
So I was talking with Michael Russo, and he asked me a question. He asked, so let's say a person's grandmother had cancer, and then they were saved. Is that miracle for him? And I said, well, what you said before, that sometimes a person is saved for the people around them, how they're going to affect that person. Would you say that would be a correct way to answer that?
Almost. Now, you know me, I'm very picky with words and the way things are expressed. We have this kind of very simplistic one-track mind. What was the reason? What was the cause? And if I tell you there were 16 elements, all of which were relevant, and together they brought about the result, the answer I get is, I can't listen to 16. Tell me the cause. Just leave me alone. Sorry, it's not like that. So, for example, Dinah is raped. Why is Dinah raped? Well, the verse says she went out to visit the local discotheques. She went out to associate with the girls of the land. So, But then Chazal say, Yaakov put her in a box so Esau wouldn't see her when he went and presented his whole family to Esau, because he didn't want Esau to look at her and say, oh ho, we're making up now and we're going to be allies, let's seal it with a marriage. He's the uncle, she's the niece. According to Jewish law, you can do that. He didn't want that to happen. That's why she was raped. So the 8-year-old says, well, so which one is it? And the answer is, what did she do to lose her merits that would have protected her? She went out to fraternize with the girls of the land. What is it that prevented Jacob's merits from protecting her? Because he put her in a box. And had she had either type of merit, that might have protected her, but she didn't have either type of merit. So it was the two of them together that brought it about. We have many, many, many such cases like this. Coming out to the descent to Egypt, right? And the Gemara says, look what happened. Jacob gave Joseph a special coat, and they were envious of him. They sold him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt. And then the whole family went down to Egypt. That's how we got to Egypt. Don't give special recognition to one child among the children. Look what happened. So the commentators asked, but wait a minute, didn't God tell Abraham that his descendants were going to be strangers in a land not their own, and slaves and so on and so on? So it had to happen anyway. So Maharam answers, it had to happen, but it didn't have to happen this way. That Joseph was sold into slavery and Jacob's mourned for it for 20 years, went through that trauma and all the rest. It didn't have to happen that way. Could have been that there was a conference in Egypt of all the greatest scholars of the world, and they came down, and why did it have to happen this way? So, but it means that the actual things that happened, part of it was because of the covenant between the pieces, and part of it because of what Jacob did, and many other things as well. Don't get trapped into a kind of simplicity where, one event, one cause, one for one, and end of story. I think life isn't that simple. General life isn't that simple, and certainly from our point of view, it's not that simple. Yeah.
So I've heard that when you're in like a life-threatening situation, that you can be saved based on your merits, or something to that extent. And then if that's the case, that when you are saved, do you use up the merit, and like that can't count for another life-saving situation, or do you just have like a level of risk that you can now go, you have such merit, or X level of merit, you can now go through life-threatening situations up to a certain level without issue?
The answer is yes, meaning both.
Okay.
Sometimes yes, and sometimes the other, and there are cases brought where you use them up. But then the way you respond to what happened may generate new ones which could replace them. We're coming to Hanukkah now. I'll just tell you what the Kedushas Levi says, that this should maybe help you focus. There are two ways to respond to a miracle. Let's imagine that he's driving his motorcycle up a mountain road with one lane on each side, and all of a sudden a truck is coming around the turn, and he's going to smash into the truck, so he turns and he goes off the edge of the road, and the abyss is 500 feet below, but 10 feet below there's a tree. And whereas the motorcycle, falls into the abyss and smashes to smithereens, the tree catches him on his coat, and he's caught. And then a minute later, there's a truck that comes by, and the driver happens to notice him, and the truck driver has a ladder, and lets it down, and he climbs up, and he's saved. So here's two ways to respond to this set of events. One is, I was dead. I was over the cliff. I was dead. And the tree caught me, and I'm alive. How did that happen? The odds against that are infinity to one. That's just not going to happen. So let's see. I was saved by a miracle. And miracles come from the Creator. Thank you, Creator, for saving my life. That's one way. Here's another way, slightly different. Let's see. I went over the edge. I was caught by a tree. That's a miracle. And since it's a miracle, it means the Creator showed me that He's operating, showed me that He did something for me. Thank you for showing your care of me. Now let's see. I went over the cliff. That means I would have died. Oh, so my life was saved. Yes, thank you for saving my life. What is the emphasis in the response to the event? Is it that my life was saved, and then you figure out, and it was saved unnaturally, and unnaturally comes from God, so I thank Him, but the event was the saving of my life? Or is it that something unnatural happened? If it's unnatural, it's coming from the Creator. Creator showed Himself to me. I'm grateful for the fact that He showed His action to me, and as a footnote, yeah, my life was saved also. When you look at the miracles that take place, you realize that you were the recipient of God pulling back the veil and showing Himself to you. That in itself can create a gigantic leap in your spirituality and the way in which you do other mitzvahs, which could generate. I had this experience, and I believe that in 9/11, right afterwards, I had to speak in America, and I took the joint flight, I don't know if they still have it, but El Al to London and Virgin from London to New York. I was coming back. A few weeks later, my flight was supposed to be from JFK at 9 o'clock in the morning. My flight's at 9 o'clock in the morning. I get there at 6 a.m. It was already late. It was like autumn, and it was dark. I get there with a taxi, and I get out with my bags. Taxi drives off. I turn to go into the terminal. The terminal's absolutely dark, completely dark. Well, like, okay, but what do you mean? There's going to be a flight here in three hours. How can it be dark? Go in, look around, nobody there, absolutely empty. And then a car drives up. And the person in the car calls to me. I walk over, and he says, "Are you here for the Virgin flight to New York? To London?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's been moved to Newark." Well, in those days, they didn't get in touch with you, and so it's moved to Newark. "Oh," I said. And he said, "And I'm driving there. And I see that there's a young woman in the back of the car. That's his cousin. He's driving her to Newark to catch the Virgin plane to London," right? So we packed my bag in, and I'd sit in the front seat with my knees under my chin. And I asked him, well, why were you here at JFK if you're going to Newark to take your... He said, "We just thought we would come and take a look and see if there's anybody here." Really? I don't think that happened before or since in the history of the world. And have it just when I needed it. Because if he hadn't come, I'd have been stuck. Right? I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu pulled aside the veil and said, "You need to get there, I'll get you there." No. He wouldn't even let me pay for the tolls. I was prepared to do something. No, he wouldn't even let me pay for the tolls. So when something like that happens to you, you have to turn that into a sense of gratitude, tell it to other people so people will be aware of these things. And in that way you could replace and even get a profit in the merits that you had before. So it doesn't have to be that you end up with a net loss. You can use it as a stepping stone to a higher position. Yes?
Does God answer the prayers of non-Jews or do miracles for them? Like Christians, Muslims, Hindus?
Well, let's be careful now. I said we're praying for miracles is something which...
Yeah, okay, yeah.
You mean with stam prayers? Absolutely.
But does He answer their prayers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not only does He answer their prayers, there is a series of books called Small Miracles, put out by two women who took records of miracles happening to people all over the world, of different, some Jewish, some not Jewish. These are two Jewish religious women. And when it came out, I thought to myself, what's our position on God doing miracles for non-Jews? I asked a number of smart, learned people, and I didn't get an answer. I asked my Rabbi Yatzar, and he said, "Of course. Doesn't it say that one of the reasons for the plagues in Egypt was for the Egyptians to know that God is running the world? Doesn't it say that I'm doing this so the Egyptians will know?" Yeah, it does say that. So he said, absolutely, God will do miracles for non-Jews. So I think that doing miracles and answering their prayers, that's certainly true. It'll vary from case to case, but there's no blanket exclusion for non-Jews in that respect. Yeah.
Regardless of if their religion is Avodah Zarah or Antichrist.
Yeah, this is very interesting. Regardless if their religion is Avodah Zarah, idol worship. The temple was supposed to be a place where all people in the world could offer sacrifices. If you read Solomon's dedication of the temple, the beginning of the book of Kings, he says explicitly, when non-Jews come and they offer sacrifices, you should hear them and should answer them, and you should. By the way, that's another proof of it. He says there he's talking about prayer. When they come and they pray, Solomon's dedication only mentions prayer, doesn't mention sacrifices. When they pray, and they pray with this place in mind, you should answer them. Now, there's a case in the Gemara where one of the Roman emperors sent a sacrifice to the temple and was accepted. There's another case where it was not accepted only because the renegade Jew who brought it put a blemish in it, but had it not had a blemish in it, they definitely would have accepted it. That Roman emperor didn't become Jewish or give up his idol worship, but he recognized that the Jewish God is also a power and also important, and he wants to offer a sacrifice to him. Yes, we do accept it. We do accept it. Yeah.
So I've heard that there are people who experience like minor prophecy even today. But how is that possible without the temple existing?
Well, the temple existing isn't a condition for prophecy. Ezekiel, the prophet, was in Babylon after the destruction of the first temple, before the building of the second temple. And his prophecy was without the existence of the temple. So, and there were many prophets before the existence of the temple, before Solomon built the temple. So the prophecy is not linked to the existence of the temple. Prophecy is linked to a period of time, the beginning of the second temple, when you had the men of the Great Assembly. Among their number were the last prophets. And since then, there hasn't been any prophecy. But if you take the title divine inspiration as a category, what we call prophecy is only one of the types of divine inspiration. And the other types of divine inspiration have not been terminated. So you have what's called Ruach HaKodesh, which is translated as Holy Spirit, and other lesser dimensions, and those still function. So it's just, and there's a big difference, because if a person has the status of a prophet and he tells you to do something, you have to do it. A person who has Ruach HaKodesh tells you to do something, you don't have to do it. And he can tell you even to violate laws of the Torah, the prophet can. Up to and not including idol worship, but anything else, violating Shabbos and whatever it is, he can tell you to do and you have to do it. That's because he has the legal status of being a prophet. But the law of forms of inspiration don't have that status.
What's an example of Ruach HaKodesh?
There's a story in the Tanakh. Now my grasp of the stories in the Tanakh is weak, but it was Yonasan, was Shaul's son, and his armor bearer. There was an army that was surrounding Yerushalayim to attack Yerushalayim, and they had no choice they felt they had no choice, so they went out to appeal to that army, and of course the enemy army, and it could very well, the natural response would have been to be killed. So Rabbi Abraham of Rambam's son, for to pay the Sefer Maspik Lo of the Hashem, he's very, very committed to taking personal responsibility for your affairs and doing what's called the shtadlus. He has a long chapter where he goes into great detail, and he asks, how could they do that? One of the things you have responsibility for is for your safety. And they knew that this was an enemy army. How could they have done that? And he says the only way to explain it is they had Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh told them that this was the right thing to do. And of course, and if you have Ruach HaKodesh, you know that you're having it. It's not a doubt. So then you know you can rely upon it, like we said before, if the Creator wants you to do it. So then it's okay. And I've asked this of many people, I believe that since he doesn't have any source for this, let me just set it up just slightly differently. They go out and do this, they're violating a rule, which we know, and nowhere are they criticized for this. There's 3,000 years of Jewish literature and history and thought and discussion, and nowhere are they criticized for doing this. Well, then it can't be wrong. So if it can't be wrong, there's got to be some reason that it's right. And he says, his suggestion is that it's Ruach HaKodesh. So I said to people, I think then I could use that principle in other cases where something's done, it seems to be wrong, no one criticizes it, that it could be Ruach HaKodesh. For example, Rachel giving Leah the secret signs by which she was supposed to identify herself to Yaakov on the night of the wedding. She gave them to Leah so that Leah could pretend to be her, right? And she didn't consult with Yaakov, which is, I think, a terrific question. Okay, you feel for your sister, but what about your husband, with whom you had an agreement, right? If she didn't have Ruach HaKodesh, I can't explain how it is that it was right for her to do that. So I think that you have cases like that, and then you have cases where people knew things that, for example, the Chafetz Chaim, who died in 1933, several times before his death, was quoted as saying the First World War was child's play. Kinderspiel. Well, approximately 15 million people died in the First World War. Approximately 60 million people died in the Second World War. Definitely sounds like he knew something. Some kind of terrible disaster was coming. Things like that, are things where we would credit that to Ruach HaKodesh. So these things definitely happen. And, yeah.
How is it fair that one person might have merits from their father and I wouldn't, or that their prayer would be answered and I wouldn't because their father was a tzaddik?
How would it be fair to the father who was a tzaddik? Not.
Not to me.
I know. I'm asking the parallel question for the opposite effect. I'm saying, how would it be fair to the father to have his prayers ignored when he's praying for his son about whom he, the father, cares and loves? How would it be fair to him? Fairness is a very tricky idea, number one. And number two, fairness isn't the only moral desideratum. Let's say you have, they actually do this in some schools, you have grades for performance and grades for effort. And let's suppose a person, in his family there was a divorce, and he finds it hard to hold together, and so on and so on. And they don't record his grades for performance. They only report his grades for fairness. Is that fair? Is it fair to the other ones who got performance grades and they have to be judged their performance grades? Well, maybe fairness isn't the right moral consideration here. Maybe the right moral consideration here is chesed, mercy, kindness, because this person is drowning otherwise. So it's not that that's the only consideration. But here you have a conflict of fairness. To ignore the father's merits and his prayers is also not fair to him. So it's not clear that fairness is going to settle what the outcome should be here. Yeah.
What would you say is the difference between fairness and justice?
So you want to know John Rawls, who wrote one of the great works in political philosophy in the 20th century, wrote a famous essay on which his theory of justice was based, and the title of the essay was "Justice as Fairness." So justice is a very difficult subject. It goes all the way back to Plato and been discussed and debated, and there's no agreement on what it really means. But fairness is definitely an important element of justice. But justice itself is limited, because justice tailors the outcome to your performance. Right? Now let me ask you a question. Imagine there's no universe yet. No universe. And God is, so to speak, deciding to create the universe. Could you advise him that he should do it out of fairness? I don't think so. Because there's nobody there. There's nothing there. There's nobody fair to. If he doesn't create the universe, it's not unfair. There are no victims. So fairness won't work there. It's irrelevant. There it has to be loving kindness. That's why we say, Olam Chesed Yibana, the world is created out of loving kindness. Loving kindness is an original principle that can give rise to a world. Fairness is only a principle of dealing with the world already operating, people already doing things and having responsibilities, and then judging their performance. It's a very, very different concept. Both are important, but from our point of view, they're not equally important.
So you say that fairness is kind of putting the person into play, while justice is God himself.
No. First of all, when I tell you he wrote an essay called Justice as Fairness, I'm now saying that from the point of view of that essay, fairness is all there is to justice. There may be other features in justice, maybe not, is very controversial, but Loving kindness isn't a feature of justice. It's distinct from justice. Even God couldn't use justice as a reason to create the world. Justice is a principle of how you treat the world once it's operating, and people are doing things better or worse, and people have responsibilities, and people are being victimized, and so on and so on. Then you can talk about fairness. But before that, fairness doesn't apply. And therefore, that idea of justice doesn't apply. From our point of view, also, it doesn't apply. Yeah.
I forgot it in Hebrew, but it says somewhere that God, the Jewish people, and the Torah are one. Chad,
Yeah.
whatever. What does that mean?
So first of all, those words are a quote from the Ramchal. It's roughly the idea is in the Zohar. Okay, I'll teach you something very important here. Even really smart people sometimes. When you say A and B are one, you might mean two different things. You might mean A is identical to B. They are the same thing. That you could mean. Or you could mean that A and B are both pieces of a larger whole, which is a fully integrated whole. Both of those are ways to understand A and B are one. And obviously, the first idea is not correct here. God is not identical to the Torah, and God is not identical to Jewish people, and Jewish people aren't identical to the Torah. But what it means is they form together a single integrated unity. The Torah, in a certain sense, is God's ratzon, it's His will. It's will for the world. The world was created for the sake of the Torah, for the sake of the Jewish people. So we are the ones whom the will is aimed at, and we are the ones who enact the will in the world. So there's an integrated relationship here where none of them could be understood without understanding the other ones and how they relate to one another. That's when you talk about husband and wife become one, it doesn't mean they become both asexual. If you have a male and a female, yeah, male and female, right, no apologies. And they relate in a certain way, and they create a new thing. It says in the chapter 5 of Genesis, Vayikra es Shmam Adam. He called their name Adam, not his name. Adam is a name for the two of them unified together. Yeah.
Is that where Christianity's 3 and 1 comes from?
No, that's a different thing, and I'll with this I'm going to end. There's something called the vikuach, the disputation. The king of Aragon forced the Ramban to have a disputation with a Jew who had become a Catholic, and the Ramban wrote it up afterwards. The king of Aragon apologized to the Ramban. He was friendly with the Ramban. He said, the church is pushing me to do this. After 3 days of them throwing questions at the Ramban says, "You've been quizzing me for 3 days. Do I get a chance to ask a question?" And then the king consulted with the priest and said, "Yes." So he said, "Look, you guys tell me that you believe that there's three, and there's one, and the one is three, and the three is one. Let me ask you, is that like 3 peas in a pod?" So they say, "No." "Well, is that like one object with 3 qualities?" They say, "No." So he gives a couple of examples, and he says to them, "Okay, I'm not getting it. You tell me. What do you mean when you say 3 and 1? And they said, "We don't understand it. We just believe it." And the Ramban said, "If you don't understand it, you can't believe it." Now, actually, the Ramban is quoting the Rambam word for word in the Guide of the Perplexed, Part 1, Chapter 50, where the Rambam says exactly the same thing. What he says is some people are interested in what words to say, and they don't have any interest in the thought that's supposed to be behind the words that you're saying. And to say that there's 3 and there's 1, and the 1 is 3 and the 3 is 1, is just babble. There's no meaning there. And therefore, when you say the words, you're making sounds in the air, but you're not expressing a belief because there's no meaning there. And this is what the Ramban is communicating at the end of the disputation. If you don't understand, there are various different ways of not understanding. I could not understand why something happens. I could not understand How it happens, we're not talking about that. We're talking about where I don't understand what happened. If the words that are given to me don't give me any understanding of what happened, then I can't be said to believe that it happened, because there's no it. So, the creation of the world, the Rambam and Ramchal, others say, it's impossible to understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings the world into being. That's right, we don't understand how, but we understand what it means, and therefore we can believe it, because the words of what happened are meaningful words. We just don't have an understanding of the how and some of the why we understand, because he told us. We understand the how of it. But when you say the situation is 3 and 1 and 1 and 3, and they're the same, and your mind boggles, you say, wait a minute, how could 1 be 3? How could 3 be 1? And then your interlocutor says, don't worry about that. I know you can't understand it. You can't understand what I'm saying. You can't understand my words. Just believe it. There's no it to believe, because there's no idea behind the words. So you have to make the words work. Otherwise, you're not doing anything. Okay.